Hey everyone, in this tutorial we're going to take a look at building a skill for Amazon Alexa. So if you're not familiar, just a quick overview on Amazon Alexa. It's the voice assistant for Echo powered devices, and I believe that the assistant also works for things outside of Echo as well. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to make skills, which can easily be referred to as apps as well, for the Alexa voice assistant. So this skill, it's going to be very simple, but we're going to create it using a variety of technologies. We're going to be using Node.js, TypeScript, JavaScript, a few different things. We're not actually going to publish this skill. We're going to test it through a different way, but you could easily bundle this up through a zip archive and publish it yourself. And when I say publish, I mean for this particular example, we're going to be designing this skill as if we were designing it for Amazon's Lambda service, so AWS Lambda. You don't need to use Lambda when developing Alexa skills, but it is very convenient, and if you're lucky enough, it could be free as well, depending on how much load your skill takes. But again, that's kind of beyond the scope of this. We just want to get something working to show how easy it is. So I do have my terminal up. What we're going to do is we're going to be creating this project on our desktop. The assumption is that you already have Node.js installed on your machine. If not, go ahead and install. Right now, I'm using version 4 of Node. You could use whatever version you want. It should work out fine. So on your desktop, let's go ahead and create a directory called, let's go ahead and call it make directory Alexa project. And then we're going to navigate into it. Perfect. So you're going to notice something new that I'm using throughout this tutorial. I'm actually going to be using Yarn as my Node package manager instead of NPM. Yarn was recently released by Facebook. I've actually taken a liking to it. It's very fast. It's easy to use. But if you want to use NPM, the packages are the same. Just the commands to get you to that point are just slightly different. So I am going to be using Yarn. So what I want to do now is I want to say Yarn init, and let's go ahead and walk through the flow. Everything can be the default for this particular example. All right, it's gone ahead and created our package.json file. The next thing we want to do is we want to create a series of files and directories. So we're going to create a directory called source, and inside of that directory we're going to create a file called index.ts. So this is a TypeScript file. All right, so we're also going to create a directory called test. Make directory test. And the reason why we're creating this directory is because we're actually going to be using unit tests to test this skill. It does do everything that Amazon Alexa would do. So as long as these tests pass, you should be fine when it comes to deploying your project, and you can always test them as well, again, with the tools that Amazon provides as well. So inside of this test directory, we're going to create another file. This time we're going to say touch test. Instead of a TypeScript file, though, we're going to call it index.js. And the reason we're doing this is because a lot of the testing frameworks that exist as of right now aren't very TypeScript friendly. It's much easier to write our tests with plain JavaScript than it is with TypeScript, and I'm all about simplicity. So let's go ahead and make this a JavaScript file. Perfect. So now that we have the kind of project structure created, we want to go ahead and add our Amazon Alexa dependencies. So for one, our first and foremost, probably most important dependency is the Amazon Alexa SDK. So let's go ahead and say yarn add Alexa-SDK. So this went ahead and it downloaded the official Amazon SDK, but it actually was for JavaScript. But since we're going to be using TypeScript for most of our development, we actually need to download the type definitions for this project as well. So assuming you have definitely typed or typings installed, let's go ahead and install those type definitions. I'm going to be using typings. So it'd be typings install Alexa. Actually, it's going to be DT tilde, so the squiggle line by the one key, and it's going to be Alexa SDK. We're going to do --save --global. All right, so that's one dependency out of the way. Now we want to go ahead and add our testing framework dependencies. So we're going to say yarn add, and again, you could be using npm as well. The actual dependency that we install will have the same name. So it'll be yarn add chai. We're going to be using Mocha with chai for testing. And then yarn add Mocha. Perfect. Now there is one more dependency. This is actually a very useful dependency. It's what makes testing Lambda skills possible. This was not created by Amazon. It was created by a third-party developer, but I use it all the time. It's very useful. So what we're going to say is yarn add AWS Lambda mock context. So at this point, all of our dependencies should be in place. So I'm going to clear my terminal, and I'm going to open up this project in my editor of choice. I'm going to actually be using Atom, but you can use whatever you want. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start coding our index.ts file. So open it, it's in the source directory. We're going to click on index.ts, and we're going to first import the Alexa SDK. What we want to do now is we want to create the handler, which is what Lambda uses. So this is very specific to Lambda. Less so for, say, Node.js or anything like that. But let's go ahead and say export class handler, and we're going to say constructor. And inside of the constructor, we're going to pass in an event, which is of type Alexa dot request body. We're going to pass in a context, which is of type Alexa dot context. And then finally, we're going to pass in a callback, which is of type function. So inside of this constructor, we're going to initialize a few things. So we're going to say let Alexa equals, and now this is Alexa lowercase. You'll notice that when we imported it, I used uppercase. But let's go ahead and say Alexa dot handler event context. So we're passing this into the SDK. Or we're initializing this SDK and storing it as Alexa. We're also going to use, we're going to assign an app ID. So we're going to say Alexa dot app ID equals, and then let's go ahead and give it an ID. For now, we're just going to call it something random. Amazon actually assigns this ID to you when you're creating a new project with them, but for testing locally, it's not really a necessity. But we will need to have an ID of some fashion. It doesn't matter what it is, though. The next thing we want to do is we want to say Alexa.execute. So this is kind of the bootstrapping of our Alexa application right now. So the next thing we want to do, we could do it above or before this class. I like to do it above, but we're going to say let handlers. This is of type Alexa.handlers. With a capital H, sorry. And it equals an object of sort. Before we start populating that object, let's go back into our handler class. Right below line 10, we're actually going to say Alexa dot register handlers, and then handlers. So these handlers are actually what triggers Amazon Alexa actions. So these handlers will be a series of intents. So intents being a different social choice. So maybe you're asking Alexa to find the time. That could be one intent. Maybe you're trying to ask Alexa what state you live in or what country you live in. That could be a different intent. So you'll have one intent per kind of feature that you want to perform. Now, before we can actually figure out what we want to perform, let's go ahead and figure out what intents we want to create. So I'm going to create a new file. This is actually, we don't actually use this within our local project. This is more of an Amazon thing. It's how we register speech patterns. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to create sample speech patterns. So these are called utterances. So what you would do is something like this. So you would start off with the name of your intent. So in this case, I want to say hello intent. So this is one particular intent. Let's say I want to have another intent called about intent. That could be another one. But what's most important is what we put inside here. So let's start with the about intent. Let's say, who wrote this app? That could be one phrase that would trigger the about intent. But Amazon recommends that you put every possible combination of intent or every possible sample you can for a specific intent. So you could say, who is the author of this skill? And then it could go on and on and on. You definitely want to try to add as many as you can to get the best results. But let's say what happens when you want to have more of dynamic properties. So I'll save this. Let's call this utterances. Let's see what happens when we want to have dynamic data. So in this case, we would say, what is, and then we can say word in Spanish. So in this case, we're saying what is, and then some kind of mystery word here. It could be anything in Spanish. So if Alexa detects this, so let's say, what is hello in Spanish? Alexa should respond, hola. So it can give you, you can add as many of these intents as you want, and you should definitely have as many utterances as possible. But we'll just leave it at that for now. Let's go back into our index.ts file now that we know what intents. We're only going to be using 2 intents for this particular application. We're going to go to index.ts, and we're going to start filling these handlers. So the first handler is, of course, going to be our easiest handler. This one's going to be the handler it has no dynamic values in it. It's just straight phrases. So let's say about intent, and it's going to be a function. And inside of this function, we're going to have what triggers a response. So we're going to say let self, and that's going to be Alexa.handler equals this. And then we're going to design our output phrase. So let's go ahead and say let speech output equals this skill was written by Nick Raboy. And this is what Alexa would read to you. But we need to tell it how to emit this data to you. So we're going to say self.emit. We need to determine how we want to emit it. So there's various ways. So for example, if you say tell with card, it's going to speak it to you, and it's going to leave record of it inside of the Amazon Alexa mobile app. So that way you can see it in writing as well as verbally. Otherwise, you can just use tell, or there's other options as well. You'd have to read the Alexa documentation. We're going to give the card a title. So we're going to actually give it a message. So we'll say speech output. Now we'll give it a title. Let's call it Nick's skill. And then we want to give a spoken response. So it's going to be speech output. It's going to be the same thing. So this would be one response right here. This would be one intent. So if we go to the utterances, if someone speaks who wrote this app or who is the author of this skill, this was what will be fired, and this is the message that will be responded with. So now let's go ahead and design another one. So let's go ahead and design our hello intent. So our hello intent is going to be a little different, but again, we're going to say let self, and then it's going to be Alexa.handler is the type, and it's going to be equal to this. We need to figure out what value was passed in as that parameter, so that word parameter. So what we're going to say is let intent request equals Alexa.intent request, This is all TypeScript, by the way, not JavaScript, but it's a superset to JavaScript. So we're going to say self.event.request, and we're going to say let value equals intent request dot intent dot slots dot word. So this is what we called it, word, just like in our utterances file, word with a capital W, word dot value. So we're going to figure out what that value is that was spoken to our Alexa unit. And we're going to say let speech output, and you can name this whatever you want. This is going to be an empty string to start. So we're going to keep it simple. You could have a very complex list of translations here, but we're actually going to say if value dot to lowercase equals hello, and I know that to lowercase should be with a capital C. So if it equals hello, then what we're going to say is speech output equals the translation is hola. So that's how what's Alexa's going to read. Otherwise, we're going to say speech output equals I didn't understand the word. So again, this is very simple. Your skill is going to be way more complex than my skill, but it does prove a very valid point. We're recognizing which utterance was spoken. We're taking that dynamic parameter and we're generating a response based off of it. And then finally, what we can do is we can say copy this line 7 and paste it down to save some time, and that would be the response. So as of right now, we're doing pretty good. Our skill actually will work at this point. So what we want to do is we want to be able to test it. The process to actually test on Lambda, it's not as easy as I would hope. So instead, it's best if we do this locally. So we're going to open up our test and then index.js file. And we're going to start designing our unit tests using Mocha and Chai. So first off, we're going to say const. And we're going to say context equals require AWS Lambda mock context, because that's what we imported. We're also going to import Chai, which we also downloaded. We're going to say var expect equals require Chai dot expect. And then finally, we need to figure out what we want to test, what file. So you'll notice I named them both the TS file and the JS file the same. You don't have to do this, but it's good for naming conventions. So we're going to say var index equals require source index. So this is the file we're going to be used to testing with. We're going to say const, so we're going to initialize this context. ctx equals context. And at this point, we can now start designing our Chai tests, our Mocha and Chai tests. So let's go ahead and start writing those out. And they're going to be very simple. You can do a lot more complex things than I am with these, but it's just to give you kind of an idea of, you know what, it's not that hard to make an Alexa skill. It's not a lot of lines of code, not a lot of time. So it's definitely a good thing to try out. So we're going to say describe. And this is going to be our testing suite, or our testing suite, whatever you want to call it. This is going to be testing. We're actually going to test one particular sample here. We're going to test out our hello intent. Testing the hello intent. And you can name this whatever you want. We're going to say function. So the first thing we want to do is we want to initialize what Lambda is going to do. So we're going to say var speech response equals null. We just want to get those variables created. Var speech error equals null. And we want to run a before. So this will happen before the rest of our tests happen. So we're going to say function done. This is our callback. And inside of it, we're gonna actually have things to do. So let's go ahead and say we're going to start this off. We're going to say index.handler. So actually where this came from, remember, we imported index, and handler is inside of our, it's our class, so it's line 23. So handler. We're going to throw an empty object in there for now, and then ctx after. We're going to change that empty object to something real soon. Before we're done with this, inside of the before, what we want to do is we want to say ctx.promise. So this is part of the mock context package. We're going to say .then, and then the response. So the response will be speech response equals response. We're going to, just for the heck of it, print it out, console.log speech response. And then we're going to call done to say that we can break out of this before function. But we're not quite done. We want to catch errors as well. Let me bring this down to its own line for cleanliness. We're going to say catch. We're going to say error. Speech error equals error. And then we're going to say done. Perfect. All right. So going back, before we actually populate this handler object, I did miss a step. We didn't initialize our TypeScript configuration file. So what we want to do is we want to clear our terminal, and you do need TypeScript installed for this. This is just an npm package, but I already have it installed. What we're going to say is tsc --init, and this should do it for us. So it successfully created a ts config file. So my editor will actually compile TSC TypeScript files when I hit save. If yours does not, you'll have to compile them manually before this is successful. But I'm going to go into index.typescript. I'm going to hit save, and you can see it generated my JavaScript file for me, which is good. So going back into index.js, I do have a file that I downloaded. So I did cheat a little bit here. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go back a directory. I'm going to say, on my desktop, I'm going to say Atom, and it's going to be, what did I call it? I called it Lambda request JSON. So this is a file. This is a JSON data that I actually pulled directly from AWS Lambda. It'll give this to you when you start creating your skill online. So I just ripped it off directly. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to my index.js file. I'm going to replace this object here, and I just pasted it in. We also do have to match our ID. So what did I call my ID here? Index.ts, I called it my Alexa ID. So let's give it a shot. My Alexa ID. I also have hello intent here, which matches the intent that we created. We have our parameter being word, and then the value so Amazon Alexa actually creates this for us, this whole JSON object. So you provided a sentence, this utterance, it'll convert it into this. So it's recognized that we're calling the hello intent. It recognized that we have one word parameter, and that value of that parameter is hello. So I'm going to save it. And we need to continue with generating our tests. So outside of the before here, let's go ahead and create a single test. So we're going to say describe. We're going to say, is the response structurally correct? Function. So in here, we're actually seeing if the response looks correct. We're not checking data validation. We're just checking to make sure that the type of response looks accurate. So we're going to say IT, and we're going to say should not have errored. We're going to say function, and inside of it we're going to say expect speech error to be null. So I'm going to save it, And at this point, I think we should be able to test it out and see if there's any kind of problems. So going back to the terminal, let's go ahead and give it a shot, and hopefully all is well. So I'm gonna go back to my terminal that has my Alexa project. I'm gonna clear it, and I'm going to say Mocha. Mocha command not found. So I'm going to install it. So I'm going to install it globally. So I'm going to say yarn global Mocha. Oops. Should be yarn global add Mocha. I got a permission denied error. So let's see if it actually worked. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to using npm now. I know that I just shot it down just a second ago, but you know what? Yarn just came out the other day, so I'm going to say sudo npm install -g Mocha. All right, so just installed it, so I'm going to run Mocha again. So it looked like my one test passed. So the response, we had it print out. I know that it's a little opaque, my highlight just now, but it actually says, so our title is going to be Nick's skill. This is what we'd see in the card. The content for the card would be the translation is hola, and the spoken phrase would be the translation is hola. So it actually worked out well. So let's see what happens if we enter a bad value. So we'll say hello 1. So I'm going to run it again. It'll still pass. It should still pass. But we know that our response is a little different. So I didn't understand the word. It didn't technically error, but our response is different for this particular result. So I mean, you could add plenty of other unit tests to make sure that your results do add up from both a structural level as well as a data level. But that's a little outside of the scope of where we're headed with this. So you just saw it really, this index.ts file is so short, so easy. We really didn't do a whole lot. You could swap out this stuff with remote APIs. It could be all kinds of craziness. And then our utterances file, chances are you're going to have hundreds of lines of possible speech combinations. But overall, it wasn't hard to do. Most of the time that we spent was actually setting up our test scenario, which Lambda can do for us online, or again, we could do it locally for any kind of continuous integration, or just to save us some time overall after the initial setup.